Oh, I'm back again, and I just want to give you the next segment. We looked at the Missouri Compromise, good place to start. The issue of the expansion of slavery. Can slavery move into the territories, and more importantly, I guess, can slavery move into the states? Continue to expand. Keep on that topic. Keep that idea close to you. Then after Missouri Compromise, we took a look at the Compromise of 1850. And now what I want to do is get you into the Kansas-Nebraska Act. I want to move you real quick into this because this is in proper order because it's going to deal, the Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to deal with both of these we just discussed. And so with the idea of can slavery expand is the question. And it goes back to that thing we left off with in the last segment on the Constitution. Things seem to be in conflict. The Declaration of Independence in 1776 that all men are created equal, the ideas of the birth of the principles that these are natural rights, okay, all are born with these same inherited rights, are in conflict seemingly with the Constitution, which in several ways the South argued slavery was protected by it. There wasn't anything in the Constitution denying it, and that compromise was made in 1787 at the convention. Therefore, now we leap all the way forward to Kansas, Nebraska, and this is in 1854. And what you need to kind of understand is before we jump to 1854, the year 1848 seemed to be a world revolution. World history in Europe in 1848, there was a battle between a liberal philosophy, in that case, meant the ideas of the Enlightenment, the American revolutionary ideas. There was the second French Revolution under Napoleon, that ended up with Napoleon III, should I say. But there were revolutions all across Europe in 1848 between the forces adopting the ideas of the Enlightenment, ideas of constitution, natural rights, versus the monarchies. And why I'm bringing this up is when you leapfrog back across the Atlantic to the United States, 1848 was also the same, a raucous year, bringing into conflict these two ideas. That's where I left off with the Lincoln quote. All those two principles, only one can be right. Well, with Kansas, Nebraska, what happened here is the United States movement westward. This is promoted by the idea of a transcontinental railroad. Now, this has been in the making for quite a while. And Stephen Douglas, we're going to bring him back in, the man from Illinois, was very anxious to get the Transcontinental Railroad done. Now, the railroad that was supposed to connect east to west of this great nation, because California now had become a state in 1850, it was going to end in California, out there where the gold was at. But it needed to go either a northern route or a southern route. Now, both routes were explored. In fact, if you get into this, the Gadsden Purchase, which is this small boot heel of New Mexico and that small southern part of Arizona, the Gadsden Purchase of 1853 was made under the watchful eye of the Secretary of War then, Jefferson Davis. This was made in order to secure a southern route, which would go from El Paso through Atlanta, El Paso. Douglas didn't want it to go that way because Douglas is from Illinois. Chicago is illogical. So what happened is you needed to open this region, the Kansas-Nebraska area, as it's called. It's the Nebraska Territory. You needed to open it for settlement. And the problem was very simple. It's one block, basically. What would it be? Here we go again. Missouri's right next door, so is Iowa. Would it be slavery-free? Well, that made things more complicated. But Douglas is going to find an answer. The South, as you would understand and guess, wanted it to be slave, okay? And the South would always, before we even get into the Kansas-Nebraska decision here, what you've got to understand is the South, in the meantime, if someone ever argues the South was not looking to extend slavery or anything, ask a couple questions. How about Cuba? And what about that Nicaragua excursion? The South had been poking around for quite a while, no pun intended to James Polk. And they looked at naturally gravitating towards Cuba. And the United States has always gravitated towards the idea of having Cuba. Cuba's got an interesting relationship in United States history. And so what happened here is there were expeditions that were funded by key Southerners, with presidents nodding at this, that understood this was going on. And they're really funny to read if you want to get into this. There's agencies in the United States, in New Orleans, New York City, that are going on about this. One of the guys who's involved this eventually, very interesting, is John L. O'Sullivan. I say, who's John L. O'Sullivan? I don't have time to get into everything. This is where you get the term manifest destiny coined. John L. O'Sullivan was a well-known Democrat at his time, wrote the Democratic Review, a newspaper, and he's fun to read. There are some really wild people running around. If you think politics is strange now or anything, you got to read these guys in the 19th century. They're a hoot. There's you got everything you want. You can make a big TV show of this, and they're not dull and boring at all. So anyway, it's a search for this. Where can we put slavery? Well, if we have the Missouri Compromise line, we got Texas, that's fine. Well, let's try Cuba. It's a natural extension of slavery. We already had slavery, Spanish control. Nicaragua was even funnier, and I don't have time to get into the William Walker expedition because that is just something else. But anyway, so what happens is Kansas, Nebraska want to come open in the territories, and so Douglas wants this railroad to go through. But Douglas has to get the North to agree and the South to agree. He's got to get enough votes. Let me put it this way: it's not unanimous. You got to get enough votes. The Southerners, there's absolutely no way they're going to support this because they see right away what's probably going to happen is this is going to become a free territory. The Northerners, likewise, in order to get this done, you have to do something that's unthinkable in this period of time. You're going to have to repeal the Missouri Compromise because, unfortunately, I don't know how to do this. I wish I did how to insert a map for you, and I apologize. But if you just get a map out, the Missouri Compromise lines, the southern border of Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska are above that. They're going to come in as free. So no Southerner in their right mind, dignified at that period of time, is going to vote for this. So what happens is Douglas pulled a rabbit out of the hat. He had quite a trick. To heck with national politics, to heck with the sections and everything else, anything that's sacred. Douglas is get it done kind of guy, but get it done for the political expediency, for his own good, for the state of Illinois, and for jobs, for Illinois. Douglas is going to pull this off because he's going to realize he can get just enough votes from the South. Because what he's going to do is convince that he can get the Missouri Compromise line repealed, which it did. And then he's going to convince the Northerners that this is benefiting them as well. Because what he's going to do is divide. He argued to have the area divided into two regions, one of Kansas, one called Nebraska. The natural idea was those Missourians will go over and Kansas will probably be a slave state and Nebraska will be a free state. Balance is maintained. Everybody's happy at the end of the day. That is not what happened at all. So here we get into Kansas, Nebraska. That's the political side of it, basically. There's more I'm leaving out, and I apologize, but it's going to create a hornet's nest. This is 1854. Now, why I got to say that is I'm going to get to something in a minute. Here comes the letter B. This is the way I look at it. The first thing is a guy named Anthony Burns. So as all this is going on, negotiations at Kansas, Nebraska, up in Boston, there's another B. Was a man named Anthony Burns. Now, why should we care about this? Because Anthony Burns is one of these fugitive slaves who ran away. And he's up in Boston. He's living there for a bit. He's actually working up there in a clothing store. And what happens is he made the mistake of writing a letter to his brother, telling him, how he's doing. Well, it got intercepted, got back to Burns's plantation, back to his owner. Charles Suttle, I think was the guy's name. And Suttle, lo and behold, went up north to get his rightful prize, his property, known as Anthony Burns. This created quite a stir because the Bostonians did not like seeing this. And this became the Anthony Burns episode. Burns was arrested, put in jail. A group of kind folk in Boston broke into the jail, tried to free Burns. One deputy ends up being killed in this because as soon as the people broke in, the deputies fought back, stabbed to death. He died. And then Burns remained in jail. So what happened is Suttle takes his guy, takes Burns, and he puts him in chains, and they take him down through, almost like a parade in a way, because you got to take him to the wharf to deport him back down. Oh my gosh, the calls and the yelling and the hissing and everything, the booing and everything else, and the Bostonians are going nuts. This gets big press. Well, this just exacerbated. This just agitated the situation of Kansas and Nebraska is the Burns issue. Okay, the other B. Finally, when all this gets done with Kansas, Nebraska being split, now they're basically two jump balls. Ironically, Kansas is known for basketball, so here we go. Will Kansas be slave or free? Nebraska is not a question here. Nebraska, because of the Iowans and stuff, Nebraska is going to become free. South had to have Kansas in. So the South, a large number of people, through the urging of churches primarily in the South, are told, do your duty for God and go over and keep Kansas in the hands of the slave system. Northerners did the same thing. You had this agency called the New England Emigrant Aid Society. Not I immigrant, not Emma, but Emma, you go over somewhere within. And so what happened is this gets in the next B. It's called Bibles. Now, with Bibles, I'm referring to a guy named Beecher, another B, very famous preacher of this time, Henry Ward Beecher, who preached that it was the goal of God basically for these young people to go out and keep slavery, that evil, out of Kansas. So now what you get in Kansas, if you can imagine this, are these two very radical groups. Isn't that fun? And so you put them there. We'll get to another B. You can probably guess what it's going to be, blood. But the whole idea is, if anyone talks about the beginning of the Civil War, it's Kansas. It's the first real crisis where you see physical confrontation. Although I'll give one more here in a minute. Okay, and so as these two groups are in Kansas, they're both writing state constitutions quickly, both trying to. By the way, can you imagine this? Americans stuffing the ballot box and lying about election results. The other B is ballots. Is it ballots or bullets? It's going to be bullets. And so what happens is as Congress receives two constitutions. They receive one that's a pro-slave, one that's not, that's a free state. And now you got to decide which one's right. This just agitates things. The Bibles I'm referring to is not just the literal Bible doing God's work here in the North and the South. By the way, this is what split the churches. You get Northern Methodist, Southern Methodist, Northern Baptist, Southern Baptist. What you get out of this equally is the Bibles that Beecher sent out. Now, what he said in a very famous sermon is that he was trying to raise money. He wanted to raise $25 and send a rifle out. That's how much it costs to send a rifle out there. He's repeating rifles. And what happened was they actually raised $600 or $800. So they had a whole bunch of rifles put in these boxes, and then they had Bibles on top. So he sent the good word as well as the good gun. And out they went. And these were known as Beecher's Bibles. Some of the press really loved this and called his church the Church of the Holy Rifle. So like I said, I mean, everybody talks about today, look, this is really interesting. And so when you think about this, the Beecher's Bibles are getting out there. So all these guys are armed. They're armed with cannon. You can find photos of this. They're armed with cannons, you know. They have their flags there flying. In fact, it led to one of the greatest massacres, a couple of the greatest massacres in American history out in Kansas. The Pottawatomie massacre is very good. This is the first time you see. Here's another B, a guy named Brown, John Brown. We'll get to him later down the road. Now, as all this is going on in Kansas, I told you about blood. The argument over the two constitutions are being made. And, excuse me, as this went on in Congress, a man who got to the floor, and this isn't a letter B, was a man named Charles Sumner. Now, Sumner is out of Massachusetts. He gave this speech called The Crime Against Kansas, a 2-day speech, basically, did part one, then part two. And he said some really interesting things about the South and the slavery. And then he painted specifically an individual. Here's a B named Andrew Butler. Butler was from Mississippi. He's a senator. And he just said nasty things about Butler. Horrendous things. You know, this is insulting. This is chivalry at its best, you know, because the South must respond. Your honor has been sullied. Butler wasn't even there from what I've read. He never attended at this time, but he kept pointing at where Sumner did. But what happened is this got the attention of Butler's nephew, Preston Brooks. There's another B. And Preston Brooks went and visited Sumner after these statements. And Preston Brooks, here's the other B, bashed Sumner in the head. Here we are on the floor of the Senate. And here's a guy with a silver-tipped cane named Preston Brooks, who's from South Carolina, who's a congressman himself, trying to correct Sumner and began to bludgeon him, another B if you like it, in the head. And what I like the best is if you read about this, it's not bad reading, is the idea that the Southerners responded, and they responded by saying Brooks had a good conception, but even a better execution. I mean, you got to understand. Here's these two gentlemen, supposedly Congress, and there's violence. There's violence in Kansas and blood in Kansas. There's violence and blood in Congress. So if anyone ever asked, did slavery cause tension? Yeah. And this is getting big newspaper press, you know. And as all this is going on, the tension keeps rising to the other B. This is birth. And this is the birth of a new political party called the Republican Party, 1854, in Ripon, Wisconsin. And the Republican Party is a very interesting party. At the beginning of this, what happens once the Republican Party really kind of gets formulated, it's a ragtag of different groups of people. One newspaper editor became eventually a Republican newspaper editor, was formerly a Whig, said that we are on the tiptoe of revolution in 1856 because 1856 was the next presidential election. And the Republicans were trying to win Congress and were trying to win even the presidency. The Republican Party was simply groups of, if you can imagine, anti-slavery Whigs, anti-slavery Democrats out of the North predominantly. They have some immigrants that are German. They don't like the Irish. They have nativists. They have liberty parties in there. The Free Soilers are in there. They have Midwestern racists, you name it. Basic bottom line of the Republican Party. How do you unify such a motley crew? Well, that's the nature of politics. That's really the goal of politics. There's not this monolithic idea using politics. It comes around one central idea: stop the spread of slavery. Because they're reacting to what's going on in Kansas, they're reacting to all these what they've been witnessing lately. It seems like the South's on a roll, and the South seems to have this conspiracy. They call it the slave power. They keep saying that slave power, is there, and they're in this evil conspiracy to expand slavery across, the world for heaven's sakes, if they want. And so what happened was the Republican Party formed around that idea: stop the spread of slavery. Because any other issue, they're rather divided over things. They're divided over immigration to some degree because there was a plank of a group called the Know Nothings in the Republican Party. They're very anti-immigrant, but not everybody in the Republican Party was anti-immigrant. Some of the Republican Party is anti-alcohol, temperance, okay, prohibition. But not everybody in the Republican Party is anti-alcohol. So it's kind of one of those things. Whenever you sit down anybody from a political party, if you went across several issues, they would have a common feature, but there would be some differentiations. So a lot of times it reflects more of a moderate position when you look at it: stop the spread of slavery. You do have a group of people in the Republican Party. You did have a group of people in the Republican Party that were abolitionists, but not everybody. For a case in point, Lincoln. Lincoln's not an abolitionist. But Lincoln did believe slavery was morally wrong, and he did believe slavery shouldn't have the right to expand. That's where he stopped. The idea to remove slavery completely would require a constitutional design. And so he had to stop short of this. One of the ways I like to look at the Republican Party in this period of time, if you get into the political history really, is it seemed to be the weirdest concoction of radical Jacksonians like Francis Blair, okay, and the kind of the displaced Whigs, okay, that merged together. And the example of displaced Whig would be Charles Francis Adams. I mean, you get into this. This is a weird mix. So when people say political parties, you can't have this. Yes, you can. And it depends what the issue is really about. Because these guys would never really get together in any room and agree on most things, but in this case they were. It was a tiptoe of a revolution, but the revolution wasn't quite yet. A little too early in 1856 to call it. It would be the next election of 1860 that you see this, which is a very important point. Now, the last thing to also look at this is how did the South view the Republican Party? They saw them as a tremendous threat. And when you think about it, all you have to do is turn to primary sources. The Republicans really saw themselves as a rebirth of American politics. In other words, to get it right. I like the word rebirth because this reminds me of Lincoln's big line in the Gettysburg Address. Okay, we shall have a rebirth of freedom. And when you think about this, they're kind of saying, well, we're going to get it right because we know what the founding fathers wanted. And this is what they wanted. South's arguing, ironically, the same thing, saying, well, wait a minute. Jefferson didn't mean all men created equal. He meant, not for everybody now. So these two are in conflict. They're on a collision course. What the Compromise of 1850 had basically done was bandaged over poorly, a tremendously difficult problem. It wasn't going to last. And when you get into the Kansas-Nebraska issue, it just exacerbated, it's made it worse. One Alabama newspaper editor said it really wonderfully. I had to write it down because it's a good line. He says that we know exactly who these Republicans are. He said they are a conglomeration of greasy mechanics, filthy operatives, small-fisted farmers, and moonstruck theorists. And he said that it is the Christian duty, the moral duty, the natural duty, and the orderly duty in America for these good old Southerners, us, meaning us, the Southerners, not me, okay, to take these degraded radicals and put them down hard, put them down once and for all. Two regions are just moved apart. Isn't this the way we see the other party? Isn't this true? Whenever we talk about today's 21st century, the only difference is the media just moves faster. It's the same thing, but to pause and to think and not allow the emotions to overrun, which is difficult. I guess mom was right. Count to 10. And to think clearly in the American political spectrum. The extremes have never had a good answer in any political system in the world. If you agree with it, what do those Nazis think? You have to consider a totality. Democracy is always in peril because it's from the people. And what we seek is leadership and guidance. But the leadership comes from the people, of the people, out of the people, by the people. You have to cling to something solid. The men of the 19th century, the ladies of the 19th century, because they're abolitionists too, and there were those that were not, had to think this through. It took a bloody war to solve the crisis. I hope it's not the same today. Bullets or ballots. The beauty of the American system is if the election doesn't end the way you want it, there's another one. Do it properly, regardless. The fear is losing what matters most. And to those people who died in 1861, 62, 63, 64, and 65, they died for something greater for all of us, just as equally as those who had died in 1941, 42, 43, 44, 45, who died on those beaches and far off shores for something greater. There is a sacrifice. Their sacrifice is far greater. Ours pales so much in comparison. So I hope you listen to this. I know there's 3 of you at least listening to this. I hope there's more. I hope I'm making sense. I love doing this. This is a favorite part of my life is teaching, and I love teaching about this period. I see so much of today in a mirror of then in today. Sorry. All right, you guys take care. Be safe. Think, read. Okay, and consider. Use it for good, not for evil. For the greater good, not for the single individual. Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.